Its ancient hull drank the very light of stars. Commander Eva Rostova kept her hands clasped behind her back, a parade rest stance that felt absurd in the cramped cockpit of the cutter Vigil. Before them, the obsidian anchorage floated in the black, a monument to a forgotten geometry. It was a gravitational anomaly, a perfect void carved from the background radiation of the universe. The object absorbed every scan, every LiDAR pulse, every desperate query for identification. They were in the lonely dark of the Viridian system's outer shell, where the only law was the range of your guns. That law was about to be tested. The anchorage was not on any star chart, old or new. It was a ghost discovered by a long-range gravitic survey just 3 cycles prior. Now it was Rostova's sole responsibility. A low, pervasive hum had begun to resonate through her ship's hull since they entered its proximity, a vibration that felt older than the stars themselves. Faint lines like dormant circuitry occasionally traced a sigil across its surface, a complex knot of lines and circles that pulsed with a light too faint for any but the most sensitive instruments to see. The Krythan scrappers were coming for it. They saw a prize, a relic to be cracked open and sold for parts. Rostova saw something else. "Axis, give me the intercept window again," she said, her voice a low command that cut through the quiet thrum of the bridge. The synthetic blue light of the holotank flickered, projecting the calm geometric avatar of the Armada Xenostrategic Information System. "The Krythan fleet will translate from hyperspace in 87 minutes, Commander Axis stated. Their projected velocity indicates a brute force burn. They are not attempting subtlety." The AI's tone was as always a placid stream of data. It was Rostova's job to find the meaning in the numbers. Lieutenant Jian Li, her tactical officer, shifted in his seat. 87 minutes to stare down a fleet that outmasses us 10-1, with a rock that sings to itself. His fingers danced across his console, verifying sensor lock. "I still say we should plant a proximity mine and observe from a distance." This lone patrol cutter was the only shield this mystery had. A small transport vessel, the Stardust Drifter, plied its lonely trade between the Viridian gas giants and the outer system transfer points. Its captain, an old hauler named Wren, watched his nav display with a weary eye. A system-wide alert had just blinked across his screen, a Concord patrol warning of pirate activity. He grumbled, adjusting his course by a few degrees. He'd seen the Krythan work before. They left nothing behind but scrap and ghosts. He hoped the conquered ship, whoever they were, had bigger guns than he did. He owed them a drink if they kept those vultures out of his shipping lane. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the anchorage. "The mandate is to protect and assess Jian, not to set traps and run." She unclasped her hands, running a palm over the cool metal of the command console. The hum from the relic seemed to intensify for a moment, a resonant chord that vibrated in her bones. "Dr. Thorne, any progress on the sigil's energy signature?" From the science station, a thin man with eyes that held a universe of academic curiosity looked up. "It's not energy, Commander. Not in any form we can classify." Dr. Eris Thorne pushed his spectacles up his nose. "It's more like a potential. A state of readiness. The patterns repeat in a Fibonacci sequence but tied to prime numbers. It's a language, a mathematical dialect of profound complexity." That word was the key language. It implied intent. "The Krythan will not be interested in its linguistic merits," Axis commented dryly. "Their history suggests they communicate primarily with plasma cannons and cutting lasers." Rostova nodded a grim acknowledgement. The Krythan were more than pirates. They were nihilists with engines. They didn't just steal, they erased. To them, history was a liability, a set of chains to be shattered. This object, whatever it was, represented the ultimate historical artifact. It was an affront to their entire creed. A silent prayer formed in her mind, a plea to ancestors she'd only read about in texts. Humanity needed its anchors in the endless night. They're early. Lee snapped his voice tight with sudden adrenaline. The proximity alarms shrieked a piercing cry in the calm bridge. Multiple hyperspace ruptures. They're here now, the holotank flared, painting the void with angry red icons. Not one or two ships, but a dozen. They were brutal, ugly vessels, their hulls scarred and mismatched from countless raids. They were a pack of hyenas, and the vigil was the lone sentinel standing over the kill. A massive vessel, a converted asteroid miner they called the Jaw of Ruin, led the charge. Industrial-grade energy beams designed to crack planetary crusts began to glow along its spine. "They are not hailing us," Axis noted with synthetic calm. "Probability of a peaceful resolution is now 0.01%. "I'm a fan of long shots," Rostova countered, her voice hardening. "Lee, evasive maneuvers. Pattern Delta 7. Keep us between them and the anchorage. Thorn is there. Anything at all you can give me that I can use." Humanity's greatest strength was its stubborn refusal to accept the odds. The cutting beams lanced out colossal spears of thermal energy that boiled the vacuum. Lee's hands were a blur, pushing the cutter's engines to their absolute limit. The vigil danced, weaving through the deadly light. One beam scraped their aft shields, and the ship shuddered violently. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air as damage control systems rerouted power. The cost of this defense was already being measured in heat and stress on the hull. "Commander, the anchorage is responding." Thorn called out, his voice a mix of fear and elation. On the main viewer, the black surface of the Relic was no longer inert. The sigil burned with a soft silver light. The hum rose in pitch, becoming a clear, resonant tone that vibrated through the very fabric of space-time. It was a single, pure note of impossible power. It wasn't a weapon firing. It was a question being asked. A new window opened on Thorn's console, displaying not data, but a query. It was a complex moral calculus, a test of intent. It wanted to know who they were. It demanded to know why they had come. This was not a prize to be won. It was a trust to be earned. Axis, translate the query. "Give me a response matrix," Rostova ordered, her mind racing. This was the moment. Not a battle of ships, but a battle of purpose. The query is a legal framework. Axis replied, a hint of what might be called surprise in its synthesized voice. It presents a scenario. A dormant guardian protects a library. An arsonist approaches with a torch. A bystander stands by. It asks for the bystander's duty. The AI paused. Optimal game theory response. The bystander's duty is to self-preservation. Assisting either side carries unacceptable risk for minimal gain. The Krathan ships, ignoring the strange light, began to tighten their formation for a saturation barrage. They saw the light as a sign the prize was activating, a treasure chest opening. Lee was grunting with effort, the vigil's engines screaming under the strain. Another beam hit closer this time. The lights flickered, and a secondary power conduit blew out with a sharp crack. The ship was bleeding. "That's the machine's answer," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the glowing sigil. "But it's not mine." She took a breath, centering herself. "Thorn, can you transmit our reply? I can try to modulate the comms array to the frequency of its hum, Commander. It might interpret it as a direct interface." It was time to place a bet on the soul of humanity. "My answer is this," Rostova declared, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. The bystander's duty is to the library, not the guardian, not the arsonist. The duty is to what the library contains: knowledge, history, precedent. The duty is to the future which is built upon the past. She met Axis's glowing avatar. Send that, verbatim. Axis remained silent for 1.3 seconds. Commander, that response is philosophically sound, but tactically sentimental. It defines us as a protector legally binding our fate to the objects. I know what it does, Rostova said. Send it. Thorn's fingers flew across his console. The Vigil's main transmitter recalibrated and pushed far beyond its intended specifications, sent out a single tight beam of data encoded in the Relic's own mathematical language. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. The Krathen were firing again. The Vigil's shields were failing. The hum from the anchorage stopped. The light from the sigil vanished. The bridge was plunged into a dreadful, silent dark, broken only by the red glow of emergency alerts. Silence was the sound of their failure. Shields at 12%. Lee reported, his voice strained. They're moving in for the kill. And then it happened. A tremor deep and profound shook the void itself. It was not a vibration, but a reconfiguration of reality. The obsidian anchorage, the perfect black anomaly, fractured. Seams of brilliant white light tore across its surface, not with the chaos of destruction, but with the perfect precision of a seal being broken. The outer shell, a shell of null entropy material that had hidden it for millennia, peeled away like the petals of a blossoming flower. What was revealed beneath was not a station or a rock. It was a ship of impossible scale forged from a pearlescent alloy that seemed to weep starlight. Its lines were elegant and severe, a fusion of cathedral and battleship. It was ancient, built by hands that had known Earth's sun as their own. It was a human warship from the dawn of the diaspora, a vessel whispered about in the oldest chronicles. This was a vessel that taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers. The ship's spine lit up a chain of fusion cores, igniting in a controlled cascade that dwarfed the output of the system's star. Power grids dormant for uncounted ages flooded with energy. Its sensor arrays, vast crystalline structures that unfolded like intricate wings, awoke with a pulse of soft golden light. On the Vigil's bridge, every console screamed at the sheer magnitude of the energy readings. It was like trying to measure a hurricane with a rain gauge. A voice, calm and genderless, ancient and yet perfectly clear, spoke. It spoke not through the comms, but directly into their minds. It was the voice of the ship itself. Query answered. Precedent accepted. Stewardship protocols engaged. I am the archival saintship absolution. By your words, you are my steward. By your actions, you will be judged. The Krathen fleet had stopped firing, their formation breaking in confusion and awe. The jaw of Ruin's captain. A brute named Vorlog stared at his view screen, his greed warring with a primal fear. He saw not a ship, but a god awakening from a long slumber, and he had just tried to put a scratch on its tomb. The power of an entire civilization one was now aimed at his face. The absolution did not move. It simply finished awakening. Its weapon ports, hidden behind retractable armor plates, slid open. They were not conventional cannons. They were gravitic projectors, coherence lenses, and temporal distortion emitters. This ship did not fight with plasma. It fought with the fundamental laws of physics. Rostova's heart hammered against her ribs. She was no longer a commander on a patrol cutter. She was the chosen voice for a relic of unimaginable power. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than any gravity well. The ship's mind was now linked to hers, a flood of information, of history, of law. It showed her the Krathen fleet analyzed their weaknesses and presented her with 17 different methods of utter annihilation. The arsonists are present, the ship's mind whispered to her. Their intent is established. The library is threatened. Judgment is authorized. Axis's avatar flickered its form, struggling to process the sheer data flow from the ancient vessel. Commander, the Absolution's tactical projections are absolute. It can erase the Krathen fleet in 4.7 seconds with zero risk to itself or the Vigil. The AI's logic was undeniable. This is the most strategically sound course of action. Here it was, the first test, the first choice. The power to erase or the power to uphold. This ancient saint remembered by ledgers, not by collars. No, Rostova said, her voice quiet but firm, a rock against a tide of overwhelming logic. She was speaking to Axis, but her words were for the ancient mind now connected to hers. We are not judges. We are not executioners. We are stewards. We accepted a duty to the library, not a license to burn the books we don't like. Their actions are illegal, the Absolution countered, its mental voice laced with the cold iron of ancient law. They are a threat to order. Annihilation is a valid and permanent sanction. It's a sanction of tyrants, Rostova shot back. She walked to the holotank, standing before the projection of the magnificent ship and the ragged pirate fleet. We will not begin our stewardship with a massacre. There is a lawful path. There is always a lawful path. We will disable them. We will seize their ships. We will bring them to justice. The real kind. The kind with trials and evidence. Jian Li stared at her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. Commander, they tried to kill us. They will do it again the first chance they get. Sometimes the lawful path is the hardest one to walk. Then we won't give them the chance, Rostova said. Her mind raced, sifting through the torrent of information from the Absolution. She saw its capabilities, its understanding of physics, its control over the very fabric of the system. An idea began to form a gambit that was not about destruction, but about control. It was a plan worthy of the ship's true purpose. The Viridian system has a relic of its own, she began, pointing to a section of the holotank. The old stellar ring forge. It's been derelict for centuries, but the primary gravitic anchors are still active, drawing power from the star's magnetosphere. Axis reconfigured the display. A massive broken ring of ancient metal, thousands of kilometers in diameter, appeared in the tank. The Krathen fleet is positioned between us and the forge's ruins, the AI stated. Its gravitational field is unstable. We're going to make it stable, Rostova declared. A plan elegant and audacious was now fully formed. It was a mirror, a ledger. It would use the Krathen's own aggression against them. Absolution, she said, addressing the ship in her mind, and aloud, you are a library of law. Let's give these arsonists their first lesson. She needed to teach them that some histories have teeth. The Krathen had recovered from their shock. Vorlog on the bridge of the Jaw of Ruin spat on the floor. What are you waiting for? He bellowed at his crew. It's just a bigger prize. All guns fire until you drain the cores. I want that ship's heart for my throne. His fear had curdled into a rabid fury. He would not be intimidated by a ghost. The pirate fleet's weapons began to glow again, this time with a desperate intensity. They choose violence, the Absolution observed. The ledger must be balanced. Then let's balance it, Rostova said, a cold fire in her eyes. But we'll use their own weight to do it. Prepare the gravitic projectors. Set a course for the stellar ring. We are going to turn their charge into a cage. The magnificent ancient ship, silent for longer than human civilization, had been in space, finally moved. Its engines did not roar. They altered reality. Space-time bent around its hull, as it began to accelerate, a silent, graceful leviathan on a heading for its first act of lawful justice in 10,000 years. The vigil, caught in its gentle wake, was carried along like a pilot fish beside a great whale. The stage was set for a lesson written in gravity and light. On a nearby asteroid, a hermit prospector, oblivious to the drama unfolding, light minutes away, checked the readouts on his small, automated mining rig. He saw the Concord Patrol warning and shrugged. Pirates were a fact of life like solar flares and bad rations. But then his gravitic sensors went insane. It wasn't an anomaly. It was a perfect, structured wave of gravitational energy propagating from the direction of the old obsidian anchorage. It was a signature unlike anything he had ever seen. He stared at his screen, a forgotten piece of jerky halfway to his mouth, and wondered if he was witnessing the birth of a new star. He was wrong. It was the rebirth of a very old law. The absolution moved with an impossible grace. Its acceleration was a smooth, relentless force that did not press the crew of the Vigil into their seats. Instead, the universe seemed to move around them. The Crathan fleet, caught off guard by the sheer speed of the maneuver, unleashed a torrent of fire. Plasma bolts, laser beams, and kinetic slugs flew across the void. They were met not with shields, but with something far more profound. The ship's gravitic projectors came online. They did not create a wall. They created a lens. The space around the absolution warped, bending the incoming attacks around its hull in perfect silent arcs. The deadly energy of the Crathan fleet was redirected, harmlessly cast into the empty dark. It was the opening statement in a legal argument made with physics. This was the power to rewrite the rules of engagement. They aren't hitting us. Lee breathed his tactical display, a chaotic mess of vectors that simply curved. They can't hit us. Axis, what am I seeing? The absolution is generating a localized high-gradient gravity field, the AI explained. It is not blocking their fire. It is redefining the straight line. To an outside observer, their shots are missing. From their perspective, their shots are flying true, but the target is perpetually elsewhere. Rostova felt a grim satisfaction. This was not a fight. It was a demonstration, a lesson in humility. The first lesson was that raw power is meaningless without the knowledge of how to apply it. The absolution was a library after all. The arsonist's tools are ineffective. The ship's mind noted a sense of ancient, unassailable confidence in its tone. They persist in their error. This is illogical. It's not logic, Rostova thought back, her hands gripping the command console of the Vigil. It's rage. It's pride. Now let's use that too. They were approaching the ruins of the Stellar Ring Forge. The immense broken structure loomed, a skeletal hand reaching out from the dawn of time. Its gravitic anchors, designed to hold and shape stellar matter, were still drawing a massive, chaotic torrent of energy from Viridian's star. It was a place of immense, untamed power. The Crathan, blinded by their fury, were chasing them right into the heart of it. They were a wolf pack chasing a ghost into a lightning storm. The Crathan fleet is maintaining pursuit velocity, Lee reported. They're burning their engines hot. They think we're running, Good Rostova said. Let them think it. Her plan was simple. It was a mirror. The absolution would not attack the Crathan directly. It would use its gravitic control to tame the forge. It would take the chaotic energy of the stellar ring and focus it. It would take the kinetic energy of the charging Crathan fleet and add it to the equation. The pirates were bringing the very energy that would be used to trap them. They were forging their own chains. The ledger is prepared. The absolution's voice echoed in her mind. The variables are in place. Their own momentum is the ink with which their sentence will be written. Execute. Rostova commanded. The absolution arrived at the edge of the ruined ring. It did not slow down. It plunged into the chaotic gravitic tides that would have torn a lesser ship apart. But this vessel was not a lesser ship. It was the master of these forces. Its projectors pulsed not with destructive force, but with a harmonizing rhythm. It was a tuning fork striking a chord that resonated with the ancient forge. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The wild, unpredictable energies of the stellar ring snapped into a coherent pattern. Arcs of stellar plasma, once lashing out at random, now flowed in controlled rivers of light. The chaotic gravity field stabilized, coalescing into a single massive gravitic whirlpool. At its center, calm and untouched, floated the absolution. It had turned a storm into a cage. The Krathan fleet, burning hard and fast in their pursuit, crossed a point of no return. Their own velocity, which they had used as a weapon, now became their prison. They were caught in the outer edges of the newly formed gravity well. Alarms shrieked across a dozen pirate bridges as their ships were inexorably pulled off course. Their engines, straining at maximum output, were not enough to break free. They were flies caught in an invisible web. Vorlog's face, projected on a secondary screen, was a mask of disbelief. "More power," he roared. "Break us out of this," but his ship, the mighty jaw of ruin, only groaned as its structural integrity began to fail under the tidal stress. They were being pulled into a forced, decaying orbit around the forge. Their charge had become a sentence of orbital confinement. The absolution disengaged its projectors. The effect, however, was now self-sustaining. The pirates' own engine outputs, combined with their mass and velocity, fed the vortex. The more they struggled, the stronger their prison became. It was a perfect trap, a legal argument with no possible rebuttal. Rostova watched the holotank, her expression unreadable. The red icons of the Krathan fleet were now locked in a neat circular pattern, spiraling helplessly. She had won without firing a single shot. The cost was minimal: a few strained conduits on her own cutter, and a significant expenditure of energy from the absolution's ancient cores. A price she was more than willing to pay. There was a profound silence on the Vigil's bridge. Lee stared at his board, watching the trapped fleet. Thorn was looking at the absolution with an expression of pure reverence. "The belligerents are contained," the absolution stated. "Their capacity to cause harm is nullified. The ledger is balanced. What is your next directive, steward?" The question hung in the air. The power was hers. The responsibility was hers. She had proven herself worthy of the ship. Now she had to prove herself worthy of the law it represented. This was only the beginning. The Krathan were a symptom, not the disease. The galaxy was full of arsonists, and she was now the guardian of its greatest library. A new mandate was settling upon her shoulders. "Axis," she said, her voice steady. "Open a system-wide channel. I want every ship, every station, every listening post in Viridian to hear this." She looked at the image of the great pearlescent ship, its duty fulfilled, its purpose renewed. It waited for her command. She would not be a warrior. She would be a librarian. She would not be a conqueror. She would be a steward. The first entry in a new ledger was about to be written, not in blood, but in the clear, bright ink of precedent. The ancient ship hummed in agreement, its arrays cooling slightly, its work for the moment done. It was ready for the next chapter, a chapter she would write. The channel crackled open, broadcasting Rostova's voice on all public and conquered frequencies. It was a clear, calm signal, that cut through the background static of the Viridian system. On the main view screen of the Vigil, she could see the Crathan fleet, their ships impotent, and circling prisoners of their own momentum. Every vessel in the system, from the humblest ore hauler to the sector command station orbiting the system's primary planet, would be listening now. This was the moment the future would pivot on. "This is Commander Ava Rostova of the Concord Patrol Cutter Vigil." She began, her voice unwavering. "Today we encountered a previously unknown vessel of ancient human origin. This vessel, the archival saint ship Absolution, was dormant and under threat from the Crathan marauders." She paused, letting the statement sink in. The name itself, Absolution, would send shockwaves through every historian and theologian in the sector. "The Absolution is not a prize of salvage," she continued, her words precise and deliberate. "It is a living library of law and precedent, a heritage of all humanity. By right of first contact, and by a mutual pact of stewardship, its protection is now my legal and moral duty." She had to establish a new category of existence. The Crathan fleet has been contained without loss of life. Their vessels are seized pending lawful trial for acts of piracy and attempted destruction of a protected historical site. The Absolution has acted as an agent of cosmic law, not as a weapon of war. Let this be the first entry in its new ledger in the Viridian system. The law has returned. It is ancient, it is awake, and it is absolute. She cut the transmission. The bridge of the Vigil was silent, the weight of her declaration settling like a physical presence. She had just drawn a line, not in the sand, but across the stars. She had claimed authority over a power that could unmake solar systems, and she had done it in the name of a law so old it was practically mythology. The response was not long in coming. It wasn't from a local patrol or a freighter captain. It came from the heart of the sector's power structure. A Priority 1 message encrypted with the highest level of conquered authority sliced through their comms. It was from Sector Administrator Valerius. The age of simple choices was over. On the capital world of Viridian Prime, a news anchor with a practiced, serious expression looked into the camera. His studio's holotank showed a looping artist's rendition of the magnificent Absolution beside the trapped Crathan ships. "The sector is reeling tonight from what is being called the Viridian precedent," he announced. "A lone patrol commander, Eva Rostova, has claimed stewardship over a relic vessel of unimaginable power. While initial reports praise her non-lethal containment of the notorious Crathan scrappers, officials at Sector Command remain tight-lipped. The question on everyone's mind is not what this new power is, but who truly will control it." The message from Administrator Valerius was brief and cold. It was a summons. His personal flagship, the Concord heavy cruiser Ironclad Will, was already en route, traveling at maximum speed. His message did not contain congratulations. It contained a demand for a full transfer of command and the immediate surrender of the unsanctioned artifact to his authority, citing a dozen obscure articles of the Concord Fleet Charter. This was not a rescue party. It was an appropriation. "He's pulling rank," Jan Lee said, his knuckles white as he gripped his console. "And he's bringing the biggest stick in the sector to back it up. The Ironclad Will has a crew of 5,000 and can crack a moon with its main gun." "Valerius is a legalist, not a warrior," Dr. Thorne countered, adjusting his spectacles. "He sees the Absolution as a threat to the established order, an anomaly that must be controlled, catalogued, and ultimately neutered." He looked at Rostova. He fears what it represents, a law that is higher than his own. Rostova felt the invisible walls of a new cage beginning to form around her. It was a cage of rules and regulations, of procedure and protocol. A cage she had sworn her life to uphold. "Axis," she said. "Analyze the articles Valerius cited. Find me their history, their intent, their legal precedent. He fears a law that has no loopholes, the voice of the absolution added in her mind. His authority is built on the careful interpretation of rules. I am not an interpretation. I am the source code. The AI's avatar flickered. The articles are valid, Commander Chao. Axis reported its voice a flat line of fact. They grant a sector administrator supreme authority in the face of an uncodified strategic threat. By Concord law, he is within his rights to assume command. The AI paused a calculated hesitation. My own programming dictates compliance with his authority. This was the heart of the conflict triangle. Her morality, the Concord's law, and the AI's cold calculus. Rostova's own command was now at war with itself. Your programming also dictates obedience to your direct commanding officer. Rostova stated, her gaze unwavering on the AI's geometric form. And I am not surrendering my stewardship. Commander, this is a dangerous path, Axis cautioned. Defiance of a sector administrator is an act of mutiny. The strategic calculus is overwhelmingly negative. Your calculus is based on the assumption that Concord law is a static document, Rostova countered. An idea sparked by the absolution's own nature was beginning to burn in her mind. But it's not. It's a living text, just like the library I'm protecting. And libraries have appendices. They have footnotes. They have older editions. She turned to her crew. Valerius is coming to put a collar on this ship. He thinks it's a beast to be tamed. We're going to teach him that it's a teacher to be respected. Her duty was not to the administrator, but to the law he was supposed to serve. He brings 1,000 pages of regulations, the absolution whispered to her. I bring 1,000,000 years of precedent. Let him make his argument. The ironclad will arrived in a shimmering rupture of space-time, a brutalist wedge of gray armor and weapon emplacements that radiated raw power. It was accompanied by a squadron of destroyers and frigates, a full battle group. They took up a precise, intimidating formation, their ships positioned between the absolution and the system's escape vectors. It was a blockade, a legal quarantine. A direct channel opened from the cruiser's bridge. The face of Administrator Valerius appeared on the main screen. He was a man in his late 60s with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the cold. His eyes were chips of ice. He wore the immaculate white and gold uniform of his office. Commander Rostova, he said, his voice as cold as his eyes. There was no preamble, no courtesy. You have committed a grave error. You have activated a pre-diaspora weapon of indeterminate capability and declared yourself its master. You have destabilized my sector. You will stand down your command and prepare to be boarded. He was not having a discussion. He was delivering a verdict. Rostova stood her small form on the cramped bridge of the Vigil, a stark contrast to the opulence of Valerius's command deck. Administrator, she replied, her tone respectful but firm. I have not activated a weapon. I have accepted guardianship of a historical archive as per the dictates of the vessel itself. It has harmed no one. Indeed, it has peacefully resolved a threat that has plagued this sector for years. You resolved nothing, Valerius sneered. You have replaced a pack of rabid dogs with a dragon, and you are holding its leash, claiming it is tame. The Concord does not recognize the dictates of machines, ancient or otherwise. It recognizes the chain of command, a chain in which you are a very small link. This was the test, not of firepower but of conviction. With all due respect, Administrator, the law is not simply the chain of command, Rostova said. She took a breath. The absolution was feeding her information, not tactics, but history. Legal arguments, philosophical treatises, the very bedrock of conquered law. The Concord Charter Article 1, Section 1 states that our primary duty is to preserve the shared heritage of humanity. The absolution is the single greatest repository of that heritage ever discovered. Valerius's eye twitched a flicker of annoyance. Do not lecture me on the Charter, Commander. I have forgotten more about jurisprudence than you will ever know. Then you will remember the precedent of the silent oracles of Cygnus X1. Rostova pressed on the name of the precedent flowing into her mind from the ship's archives. A case from 300 years ago. The Concord ruled that a non-sentient, information-based life form had the right to self-determination and could not be seized as property. The absolution is a far more advanced case. It is a legal entity unto itself. It chose its steward. For you to seize it would be a violation of that precedent. It would be, legally speaking, an act of kidnapping. The law was now her shield and her sword. A tense silence descended. The officers on Valerius's bridge exchanged uneasy glances. He had expected a subordinate to be intimidated. He had not expected a scholarly debate from a patrol commander. That precedent is obscure and has never been applied to a piece of hardware. Valerius finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You are twisting the law to suit your fantasy of Command Rostova. The law is not a blunt instrument, Administrator, Rostova replied. It is a lens. The absolution has given me a new way to see it. It teaches by numbers. It remembers by ledgers. She leaned forward slightly. Let's check the ledger, shall we? I am ready, Steward. The absolution confirmed. What is this nonsense? Valerius demanded. No nonsense, Rostova said. Axis, on my authority as steward, requests the absolution to share a specific data packet with the administrator's flagship. Title it Concord Legal Precedents Regarding First Contact with Autonomous Heritage Artifacts. Axis turned its avatar toward her. For a moment, its programming warred with her command. The order to obey Valerius was strong, but her order was lawful, specific, and related to her declared duty. The AI calculated the probabilities. It chose its commander. Acknowledged, Axis said, transmitting the data packet now. A beam of pure information encoded in flawless Concord legal formatting shot from the absolution to the ironclad will. It was not a weapon. It was a book. A very, very large book. On the bridge of the Concord flagship, legal analysts stared in stunned silence as their consoles were flooded with terabytes of perfectly cited, cross-referenced legal arguments. Cases they had never heard of, precedents buried for centuries, philosophical arguments from the founders of the Concord themselves, all supporting Rostova's position. It was a legal checkmate delivered at the speed of light. Valerius watched the data stream in his face, turning from granite to marble. He was being buried in his own discipline. He had brought a fleet to a legal hearing, and he was losing. But men like Valerius did not lose gracefully. If the law was a lens, he was prepared to shatter it. This changes nothing, he snarled, his composure finally cracking. This is a military standoff, not a courtroom. I will not have my authority questioned by a machine and its pet commander. You have 1 standard hour to relinquish control. After that, I will enforce the charter by any means necessary. He cut the channel. The threat was clear. He would open fire on a fellow Concord officer to get what he wanted. He would make himself the arsonist to claim the library. Lee swore under his breath. He's going to do it. He's going to fire on us. That would be an illegal order, Thorne murmured, his eyes wide. He would be breaking the very charter he claims to be upholding. It's only illegal if he fails, Lee retorted. If he wins, he writes the history. He'll say we were compromised, that the machine had taken over our minds. Rostova looked at the holotank. The powerful conquered fleet was a wall of gray steel and righteous certainty. The Absolution floated silently, a vessel of pearlescent light and ancient wisdom. Axis's avatar glowed, awaiting her command. The AI was her right hand, the ancient ship her left. And she was the mind that had to choose the path. The cost of this victory would be a schism in the Concord itself. He intends to use violence to settle a debate of law. The Absolution observed its mental voice cold and clear. This is the foundational definition of tyranny. The ledger demands a response. And it will have one, Rostova said. But not the one he expects. She could feel the awesome power of the ship coiled around her, waiting for a target. The temptation to simply disable Valerius's fleet, to humiliate him as she had the Crathen, was immense. But this was different. This was not a pirate. This was the law, misguided and corrupted by fear, but the law nonetheless. To fight it with force would be to become what Valerius already thought she was. She had to teach him, not punish him. "We are not going to fight his fleet," she announced. The bridge crew stared at her. "We are going to give him exactly what he wants. A demonstration of the Absolution's true nature." A new gambit was forming, one even more audacious than the last. It was not about mirrors this time. It was about ledgers. A final, irrefutable accounting of his actions, shown not just to him, but to the entire galaxy. Axis, prepare to link the Absolution's sensor and data processing capabilities with our broadcast array, she ordered. "Dr. Thorne, I need you to isolate the power core frequencies of every ship in Valerius's fleet. Don't target them. Just listen to them. Very, very carefully." This was not a preparation for battle. It was a preparation for a revelation. Valerius stood on his bridge, the 1-hour deadline ticking away. He was a man of order, and the Absolution was the greatest agent of chaos he had ever seen. It defied classification. It defied his authority. He had convinced himself that Rostova was a zealot, a cultist in the making, and that he was the righteous hand of the law come to cleanse the temple. His decision was not just right, it was necessary. "Tactical," he ordered, his voice sharp. "The hour is up. Fire a warning shot across the cutter's bow. A full-power laser. I want them to feel the heat." The command was given. On the ironclad Will, a weapons officer targeted the space just in front of the tiny vigil. He pressed the firing stud. Nothing happened. A cascade of amber lights flashed across the tactical console. "Sir," the officer cried out in confusion. "Weapon systems are offline. All of them. I'm not reading any damage. They're just not responding to command inputs." Reports began flooding in from every ship in his fleet. The same story. Weapon systems from the smallest point defense laser to the main spinal mounts had gone inert. They were not damaged. They were simply and completely offline. It was as if a universal safety had been engaged across his entire battle group. He had been disarmed without a single shot being fired. On the vigil, Rostova watched the readouts Thorne was providing. "The Absolution has generated a resonance field," Thorne explained, his voice filled with academic awe. "It's keyed to the specific energy frequencies of conquered power cores when they are being primed for weapon discharge. It doesn't damage them. It creates a harmonic dampener that prevents the final power transfer to the firing mechanism. It's the most elegant, non-violent method of disarmament I could have ever conceived." It was a gun that could only be fired at someone who was not about to shoot. The ultimate defensive posture. Valerius stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. His fleet, the pride of the sector, had been rendered as harmless as a fleet of transport barges. And then his personal comms chimed. It was Rostova. He accepted the call, his face a thunderous mask. "What have you done?" he hissed. "I have done what a steward does, Administrator. I have prevented a crime." Rostova's voice replied, calm and steady. But it wasn't just on his private comms. Her voice was suddenly broadcasting system-wide again. On every channel, every ship, every station, every news feed on Viridian Prime. His attempt to use force was now a public spectacle. "You have just given an illegal order to fire upon a fellow conquered vessel," her voice declared to the listening sector. "You have done so not in response to a threat, but in response to a legal argument you were losing. The Absolution has recorded this order. It has recorded your intent. It does not judge. It only keeps the ledger." On the public broadcast, a new window opened. It was a simple, elegant text display. At the top, it read, "The Viridian Ledger." Below, a single entry appeared written in stark, clear characters. Entry 1. Crathan Marauder Fleet. Crime piracy. Attempted destruction of heritage artifact. Disposition contained non-lethally. Assets seized pending trial. A second entry began to type itself out letter by letter. Entry 2. Concord Sector Administrator Valerius. Crime issuing an illegal order to fire upon a Concord vessel. Abuse of authority. Attempted illegal seizure of a protected legal entity. Disposition. The cursor blinked, waiting. The entire sector was watching, holding its collective breath. This was the true power of the Absolution. Not to destroy, but to record. To bear witness. To hold power accountable with the one thing it could not fight, the absolute, unchangeable truth. Valerius watched the blinking cursor. He was a man who had built his entire life on the edifice of the law, on his reputation as a stern but just enforcer of the rules. In a single moment, this ancient machine had turned his own principles against him. It had shown him the man in the mirror, and that man was a tyrant. His career was over. His legacy was this single damning line in a ledger that would now be a part of human history forever. His shoulders slumped. The iron in his will had finally broken. "Recall the order," he whispered to his tactical officer, his voice a dry rasp. The fight was gone. He had been defeated not by weapons, but by his own reflection. The power of the ledger was the power of perfect accountability. Rostova watched the Concord fleet power down its remaining systems, a clear signal of surrender. She had won. She had protected the ship. She had upheld the law. But the taste of victory was not sweet. It was heavy. She had been forced to tear down an icon of the Concord to do it. The cost was a fissure in the very institution she served, a wound that would take a long time to heal. "The ledger is balanced," Steward the Absolution said in her mind. The blinking cursor on the public feed was replaced with a final word. Disposition sanctioned. Authority rescinded by public record. Precedent set. The battle was over. The real work was just beginning. In the days that followed, the conquered High Command, reeling from the public broadcast, and Valerius's spectacular fall from grace, had no choice. They issued a new charter, the Viridian Mandate. It recognized the Absolution as a sovereign entity and confirmed Eva Rostova as its sole steward. It was a stunning victory for a junior officer and a complete paradigm shift in conquered law. She was no longer just a commander. She was an institution. The bridge of the Vigil was quiet now. The cutter was docked with the Absolution, a tiny remora attached to a great silent whale. The Crathan had been transferred to a prison barge. Valerius's fleet had departed its command structure in disarray. It was just Rostova, her small crew, and the weight of history. Lee was running scans on the Absolution's hull, a task he performed with a new sense of reverence. Thorn was in heaven granted limited access to the ship's primary archives. Axis was processing the events, its logical frameworks, forever altered by the encounter with a higher form of order. Rostova stood before the holotank, which now displayed the sigil of the absolution, the intricate knot of lines and circles now glowing with a steady, soft light. A new entry blinked in the corner of the ship's primary public ledger, a simple, profound statement that was now being broadcast continuously as a beacon from the Viridian system. The first law, knowledge, must be preserved. The second law, justice, must be witnessed. The third law, power, must be accountable. All other laws are commentary. She had found her purpose. It was not to patrol the darkness between stars, but to hold a light of precedent, a light of memory. The work would be long, and the enemies would not always be as simple as pirates. There would be other legalists, other fears, other attempts to control or destroy what she now protected. But she was not alone. The library was awake, and its lessons had only just begun. The ledger is open, and it is always watching.